story of John Gehl. He was born here in St. Lawrence in 1874. He was my only child. My husband Max and I were farmers, and John grew up to be a farmer too. In fact, we had farms more or less across the road from each other. If you look down that road, right over there, there's a line of trees, and our farms were just beyond that, about a mile from where we're standing today. John married Mary Cran on Thanksgiving Day of 1898, and they had their only child, son, also named John, in 1899. However, the marriage was not a happy one. Mary ended up leaving John and moving back home with her parents, who were also here in St. Lawrence. Now that was pretty bad scandal to be separated in 1900. On top of that, their son died shortly after separation. Then Mary applied for divorce on grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment. I warned John to be careful that such an accusation would be scandal for the family. But he said not to worry, everything would be fine, and I trusted him. And everything was fine up until June 28th of 1901. On that day, John was in Allenton working with a friend's team of horses. And on his way home, he stopped at the Ziegler Saloon, which is today the Little Red Inn. He was there until about 9 o'clock, which is when he said he was going to leave. His friends tried to convince him to spend the night, but he said, no, I'll walk home. It's not that far. And in truth, it's maybe only a mile across the fields. So that was the last anyone saw of him. The next morning, I went over to John's farm and I couldn't find him. So I went home and got my husband Max and said, I can't seem to find John. Would you go over to the farm and check on him? Max said, sure. So he went to the farm and he also couldn't find John. And now this is starting to become worrisome. This isn't like John. So Max decided he would widen the area of his search. He was outside looking for John when he encountered a neighbor of ours named Leonard. And he asked Leonard, have you seen John? And Leonard said, no, I haven't, but you know, I did see something lying in the field over there. You might want to take a look at that. And so Max decided to investigate, and before long, Leonard heard Max exclaiming, oh my God, it's my John. He had stumbled across John's body lying in the fields across from his home. Now at first we thought it was just an accident, that he had been kicked in the head by a horse. But we brought in investigators from Schlesingerville and from Slinger who did an examination. And they very quickly discovered that it was not an accident, but was indeed murder. John had been stabbed and hit in the head. The investigators also discovered that in all likelihood John had never made it home. He was last seen at the saloon at 9 o'clock. And his body showed that he had been lying in a rainstorm, which started at 11 o'clock. So there was only a 2-hour window for the attack to have occurred. Investigators also discovered a large area of flattened grass where it appeared at least 2 men had lain in wait, waiting for John to come home. And then there were signs of a terrific struggle. There was flattened grass. John's blood-stained vest and cap were discovered scattered across the fields. He had kicked over a couple of beehives. Now remember, John was only 27 years old, so he was young and vigorous, and he fought for his life. And that was not enough for his attackers to subdue him, so they ended up dragging him across the road, where they finished him by hitting him in the head with a rock. There was a large bloody rock found near John's body that perfectly fit the fatal blows to his head. The citizens of St. Lawrence quickly put up a $1,000 reward for the capture of John's killers. But my husband Max and I said, we don't need a reward. We know who killed John. And Max publicly accused Mary's father, Henry, and Mary's brothers, Henry and John, of murdering our John on account of the divorce. Unfortunately, the Crane family was never tried or convicted of John's murder. And in fact, nobody was ever tried and convicted for John's murder. But that does not mean that the Crane family escaped justice. Not long after the murder, a man named Frank Day from Hartford came to Henry Crane and convinced him that about to be arrested. He said he would help Henry escape to Canada along with his sons if Henry would deed over his 220-acre farm. Frank gave Henry about $4,000 cash for the farm and said he would get a mortgage for the rest and would send the funds to Henry and his sons once they were safely established in Canada, where Henry's wife and daughters remained here in St. Lawrence. After about a year of living in Canada, Henry realized that he and his sons were never going to actually see any money for the farm. They had in fact been swindled. Now this is about a year after the crime, when independent of the murder, another man named Rosenheimer from Hartford brought Frank Day, our swindler, to court. It seems that Frank Day was a professional con artist, and he was suing Frank Day to recover money that Frank owed him. Henry must have heard about this because he still had his wife and daughters here in St. Lawrence. He came back to take part in the suit, also trying to recover the funds from Frank. At the same time, my husband, Max, sued Henry for civil damages for the death of Maxine, and Henry countersued us